Hello YouTube. Alright, today we're going to be loading some rifle rounds. We're going to load the 6.5 by 55, also known as the 6.5 Swedish Mauser. I have some load data here, and unfortunately it does not have all the data that I need for the components. But what we're going to do is we're going to load up some Hornady SST. These are 129 grains. You can see it was a pretty good price at the time for 100 of these. They're a plastic tip. They're really nice. We have a little baggie of once fired brass here. I'm going to show you how to tumble that, how to trim it, and how to load it up. So stay tuned. The first thing we want to do is start with some nice clean brass. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to tumble this in my vibratory tumbler. I've come outside. It's important to do this outside in case you get dust. You will get dust, so you got to watch out for that. Make sure that everything is well ventilated. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up. I'm going to add my tumbling media, and I'm going to add my brass. Look at all that dust. That's what you don't want inside your home. You don't want to be breathing that. You don't want to get that into your carpet. So now that I've added the tumbling media, I like crushed walnut. That's what I use. It's also known as lizard litter in a pet shop. You can get this stuff relatively cheap. I'm just going to dump about 25 pieces of once fired brass in here. Another little trick that I like to do because I'm cheap, I like to use some used dryer sheets, and that helps soak up the dust a bit. This media is old and it's kind of dirty, but it will still work for what we're trying to do. So I place the lid on here next. I'm sorry, put this on here. This all helps things vibrating too badly. You're going to want to put your wing nut on nice and snug. You want that to be pretty snug there. Tighten them down and turn it on. And off it goes. We'll give this a tumble for maybe 20-30 minutes because this brass wasn't very dirty in the first place. So that should work for us. Alright, we're pretty much done with that, so now it's time to open it up and see what we got as far as nice, clean brass. Again, this is a dusty operation, so you don't want to do this inside. There. Dump that out. So you can see that's nice and clean. It's a little dusty, but it's nice and clean. It also has a nice smooth feel to it, and that's excellent when it's time to reload. You'll feel it in the machine. You'll feel it going through the dies much smoother. We're still going to lube these, but a little bit of tumbling gets it nice and clean. You could tumble that more if you wanted that neck to be even cleaner. That's fine. I chose not to. I know that's not going to be a problem. So next thing I want to do is do media separation. Watch this. Okay, I moved the press out of the way, well, not the press, but the tumbler out of the way, and now I'm going to use my media separator. And this is, just as you can see, it's essentially just a simple grate separation device. And that's not G-R-E-A-T, but G-R-A-T-E, because of the grates where the media is going to fall through. And this tumbler is interesting in that it has a little insert here that every time I do this, if I'm not careful, this little guy will fall out. So I move that out of the way, dump it in. Again, look at that dust. That's stuff you don't want in your house. That's stuff you don't want to breathe. Now this is just a convenience. This is I wouldn't call it a luxury, but it is nice to have, because even with these few cases, you just can separate the media from the cases. You get it all out so much easier. I put the lid on this, as I said before. This is an RCBS media separator. They all work essentially the same. But the lid is nice because it keeps all that dust and stuff. I can smell it now. And you just give it a few tumbles. You allow it to roll around in there, get all that media out, and it'll separate your media from your brass. Listen. It's just one of those things you can do to help make life a little bit easier. Again, all the dust. Ugh. Open this guy up, and I have nice, polished, clean cases ready for the next step. I noticed as I was pulling them out, excuse me, I'm getting a little tongue-tied, that these were dusty. I'm noticing the hands were getting dirty, fingers are getting dusty. So I figured I'd just wipe them off a little bit before toss them in this bag. This would not be happening if I wasn't using media that's so old and so dirty. It's probably time to either change this stuff or try and clean it or something. I've just been hesitant to do that because it works well enough. Alright, next up, let's go. Now we're back in the reloading room. I want to load a total of 20 of these, so what I'm going to do is simply count out 20, and I'm going to place them in this bag for case lubrication. That's the next step. Alright, that ought to do it. Okay. Got a total of 20 in there now. I'm going to be using some older Dillon case lube. Hopefully you can see that just fine. It's essentially a lanolin and an alcohol base. So whatever particular case lube you like, go ahead and use that. I'm simply going to take this and spray it here into this plastic bag. Give a few spritz of it. I've had this lube in here already, so basically I'm just going to put it in here, kind of shake it around a little bit, and try and get the lube all over the cases. This is really important that you lube your cases when you're loading rifle dies so that you will not get them stuck in the press. You don't want to do that. It can be very unpleasant. It can be very frustrating, time-consuming. And it's something you can avoid with a simple amount of lubrication. Also, one of the things that I'm probably going to do is I'm going to take a Q-tip and I'm going to get into this case mouth here a bit, and I'm going to lube the inside of the case mouth. There are products that they make that make this so much easier. There are brushes to where you simply just take the brush, you put some lube on it, and you go in and out of that case mouth. It makes it really, really nice, and just makes the process that much better. I'm doing a very simple, very low-cost way of doing this. Things that you probably already have around the house. You can see this is just a Ziploc bag. So now that we've lubed these, we're going to go on to the next step. The next step that I'm going to do is to deprime. A lot of times you will deprime and resize all in one step, but honestly, these dyes that I'm using, they are Lee dyes. I like Lee products. They're inexpensive. They usually work very well. But what I've found is that this particular dye set does not size down the base of this case as well as I would like. So what I'm going to do is use this first one. It's almost just a decapping. It's supposed to resize, full-length resize as well, but we're basically not getting the results that we want from this one. So I have another dye here that I use that I find to be much better. It is a Herter's, I believe. Older dye, but it works very, very well in regards to resizing of the case. So you basically want to run it up here. It's nice and lube. Also, we're going to take a little bit of that lube that's inside our bag. We know there's some lube in here, so I'm just going to kind of grab a little bit of that off these cases, and I'm just going to kind of run it down in there a little bit just to help resize this nice and smoothly. You can see how this process goes. Now listen, you should hear the primer pop out. Okay, I don't know if you could hear it because this was moving, but essentially the primer comes out, falls down into the used primer catch tube. You want to make sure you resize all the way, so get full extension on that. Oh, bump the camera. Sorry about that. Okay, and the next thing that I want to do is I'm going to rotate, and I want to resize this as well. So watch this part here. See here, if I can get this nice and stable for you. You want to make sure you get it all the way because it's important to size down to the base of that die. Now here's the part where it has a tendency to stick. This is where your lube comes in very, very handy. Alright, I'm doing this a little bit awkward way because the camera and the tripod are right here in the way. But that is how you resize. Show you here. You resize that case. It has been deprimed and resized. We're going to put it over here. I have 19 more of these to do, and then we're going to move to the trimming process. Alright, now that we have deprimed and resized, essentially what I like to do is wipe the case lube off of these cases. You don't need it anymore, and it just gets things nasty. You certainly don't want to run it through your rifle that way. So I just use this nasty old piece of paper towel that I've used before. Some people like to tumble them again, which is completely fine. But once you've done that, you will notice that I prefer not to prime them just yet. And the reason why I don't want to prime them is if something goes wrong during the trimming process, I don't want to lose the brass and the primer. That's why I haven't primed these yet. So this is a Forster. It's basically a very simple, very rudimentary, almost like a little lathe is what this thing is. And you have collets back here that are specific to the rifle cases that you want to load. You also have the pilot up here, and the way I like to do this, I like to insert it, as you just seen, onto the pilot first. That really helps to center it as it's going back into this collet setup. So I push this back in. You can kind of hear it grab a little bit. I've already set this by means of set screw here. This set screw right here, let me zoom in on it so you can see it. Here, there's a set screw on this collar right here. Yeah, light turned on automatically, and that prevents this from going in but for so far. So once you get the length that you want, you tighten this down and it will prevent the case from getting trimmed any shorter than you want it to be trimmed. So we push that in there. We snug it down, and this is sort of the drawback to this press. It can be a little frustrating, but you want it snug, but you can get it so snug that it's hard to get loose. So just be reasonable. These cases are only slightly larger than they have to be. The max length on these cases is 2.165 inches. And right now they're at about 2.164. Because these are once fired, I'm going to go ahead and trim them. And the trim tube length is 2.155. And I use a pair of calipers to measure that. So now that I've got this all locked in, oh, just unlocked. Okay, now that it's all locked in again, you simply give a turn. And I don't know if you can hear that or not, but there's just a tiny little bit of brass that's coming off of there. Okay, maybe not even enough. So I want to make sure it's in there nice and tight. That the more you tighten this down, it pushes it ever so slightly closer to the trimmer. So give that a few turns to make sure that it's all set. I undo it. I take it out. You'll notice that now this is nice and shiny. Let me show you one. the two of those in comparison. That's got a nice freshly cut surface on it. And what I want to do is I want to measure this and see if I'm about at the right length or if this needs adjustment. I will tell you that when I set this up using a different head stamp of brass. Okay, that didn't take much off of there at all. We are at 2.1, what, 5.8, 5.9, somewhere in there. So that probably will be all right as long as we are consistent in length for these particular shells. But it is all about consistency. So before I start adjusting this, let me chuck in another one of these guys and see where this one comes out. Snug that down. Now I can already tell this is cutting more. Don't know if you can see the little chips flying off of this or not. Okay, just bear with me here a moment while I measure this one as well. Okay, we're at about the same length. So I'm going to go ahead and load these up. I have much more to trim, but I'm going to load these up. These are not quite far down as I want. So I'm kind of, debating as to whether or not I need to adjust this for these particular cases. When I set this up, as I said before, I use a different head stamp. And clearly the base or something is a little bit different between this head stamp and the ones that I used before. Alright, I am almost done with these. I figured you guys didn't want to see every single one. But while I finish up these last couple, I want to talk to you about why you have to trim these cases in the first place. And the reason you have to trim them is because they actually grow when you fire them. They change in length. They actually get a little bit longer. Brass flows. It may be hard to believe, and maybe I'm not explaining it very well, but the brass actually is moving from the thickness, the base of this case, and it's moving towards the end. And as you continue to fire these things, what's going to happen is that the brass is going to flow more and more to the neck, and it's going to start to weaken right here. And this is how you get head separation failure, which is very, very bad news, and you don't want that. So keep track of how often you trim your brass. You don't want to trim it too much, because if you're trimming it too much, that means it's getting thin. So just a few trimmings. Think about what you're trying to do. If you're running hot loads, you're going to run out of this much, much faster than if you would if you're doing the more softer loads. Also, this Forster trimmer is a good piece of equipment, but I don't love it. And the reason I don't love it is because this thing here is hard to tighten and untighten. It hurts my hands. Maybe some of you guys are really, really tough guys and you do manual labor or, something that requires brute strength or nice, ruggedized hands. I sit at a desk all day, so it's unpleasant. It kind of hurts my hand a little bit, but it's one of those things that I just have to deal with and make work as best I can. So now that I've trimmed all of these, and the more I thought about it, the more I looked at it, I think that length is going to work out just fine. The next thing I want to do is I want to chamfer and deburr this case mouth. You'll see that's nice and smooth, but there's a square edge right there, and I'd kind of like for a more taper edge. So I use this. I believe this is a Lee chamfer and deburr tool. Essentially, you run it like that there. It chamfers the inside of that case mouth ever so slightly, and you switch it around this way, and you chamfer the outside of that case mouth ever so slightly. And you can feel it. It helps regarding the feeding of the bullet. I'm using bolt tail bullets though, so it's not the end of the world either way, but it's one of the things that I do. I like to remain consistent, so that's what I'm going to do the next step for all of these cases. And again, I don't know if I mentioned it before, but this is batch processing, and batch processing is essentially all of your cases do one step at a time, and that's what I'm doing. You've seen me deprime, resize. You've seen me trim, and again, there's a difference between resizing and trimming. And now I am deburring and chamfering the case mouth. There are some cutters that will have a three-way cutting head so that when they come out of the cutter, you don't have to do this step. If time is of the essence and that's something that you really, really value, you want to go as quickly as possible, that may be something you want to invest in, as a three-way cutter for the particular case caliber that you're going to be doing. I'm going to finish these up, and then we're going to actually get to the loading process. Brass prep is the drawback of reloading rifle cases. Pistol, you really don't have to do this. There's a lot less pressure. There's a lot less energy going on inside of a pistol case, and basically you don't have to resize them. I'm sorry, you don't have to trim them the same way. Some people actually do trim their pistol cases. I've never found a need for it. Everything works, and I either lose the brass or simply it gets tarnished or something else happens before I ever find a need to trim a pistol round.